This last weekend I was in St. Louis and some cornball decided to use my email address and enter into some fraud relationships with people. So I started getting emails from people and contacts from folks here in the parish wondering what I was doing, why I was in trouble, and why I needed money. And Roger Phillips and I figured out, and we think we know what happened. We think that whoever this cornball was went on the internet, picked up our bulletin, saw that I was gone, and used that as his ploy to entice some people whose emails were on the front page of the bulletin. So anyway, I thought to myself, well, somebody's reading the bulletin. Jesus decided to celebrate the Last Supper in heaven once again. So he gathered his apostles together, and he got the room all set up. The apostles arrived, there were 12 of them, this time including Matthias, the one who replaced Judas. But they noticed that there were 13 chairs for them. They wondered what that extra chair was, and they waited and waited, and they waited, and finally the door opens and in walks Judas. And Jesus gets up and goes over to Judas and hugs him and he kisses him, and he says, "I've been waiting for you." Remember the interestingness of this story, or the kind of a surprise of it, is that we would never think of such a thing happening. And yet it was Jesus who prayed from the cross for his executioners that would have included Judas. So the power of Jesus' prayer perhaps gave that glimmer of hope even to Judas at the end of his life. You wonder, to change one's heart is very, very difficult. We have a sense of justice in our hearts. We have a sense of what it means to be fair and what equality is all about. We're bent on making sure that everybody is treated the same. We get that drilled into us from the very first moments of our lives as you sit at the table as a 4-year-old and realize the other kid got a bigger piece of pie than you. Or you find out that, perish the thought, there's a large family and the last kids get treated different than the first kids, because mom and dad were very zealous when they first started out, strict as all get out. And by the time they get to the 4th, 5th, 6th kid, they're kind of more laid back. I remember my brother and sisters always accused me of that I get away with everything, since I was the last group. There's that statue of Lady Justice. She's holding the scales, and she's always got a blindfold on. That sense of equality and fairness. Well, parish thought that we would be able to share what we're getting in our salaries. We would start seeing all sorts of reasons why our hearts would then suddenly tip one way or the other in terms of our attitudes toward things. For instance, this past week, all this Husker Nation, had tremors. Tectonic plates were moving, and everybody was worried about what was going to happen down there in Lincoln with Ice Horse getting fired and all this sort of stuff. And then this morning, it kind of feels a little bit better, doesn't it? Isn't it interesting? But we still have in the back of our mind what he had been paid. But Jesus tells us something quite different today. That God can do as he pleases with his mercy. Because it's God's mercy that we're talking about here. God is God, and we are not. And he is able to give the same wages for unequal work. Grace versus works. That's the Protestant debate that took place during that Reformation in the 1500s in our church, which split the church so far apart with so many different sects. Grace and works. Is salvation simply God's grace? Or does it also consist of our works? How do our works fit into grace? Can we earn salvation? No, that's not possible. Nothing we can do can ever earn God's mercy and forgiveness. He is the true giver of it and total and complete freedom in that gift. So when we talk about merit, as so often the New Translation of the Roman Missal says about merit has more to do, way more to do with our heart changing to become like the heart of God. Our heart becoming like Jesus. Changing from within so that we can have the same kind of attitudes, feelings, and decisions that Jesus has in our everyday lives. We hear about deathbed conversions, you know? People who changed at the end of their lives. The first recorded one took place on Calvary, with the good thief saying to Jesus, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." Today you will be in paradise. Constantine, the emperor who made peace with the church by declaring it a lawful religion, was baptized in his deathbed. Oscar Wilde, an author and writer, lived a notorious life, scandalized people of his day with his attitudes and with his actions, sometimes even repulsing those. He called on Father Cuthbert Dunn to come and see him before he died, and there he was baptized and anointed before he died. These kind of deathbed conversions leave us thinking, you know, how is it that God can bring these people into heaven when their whole life has been kind of not so good? How does this work? Oscar Wilde was quoted to have said, as he was starting to really think about turning his life over to God and starting to become Catholic, he started writing things like this. He said, "The Roman Catholic Church is for saints and sinners alone. For respectable people, the Anglican Church is good enough." So besides forming our own conscience to be more like Christ's, so that our thoughts can become his thoughts, we can think about the ways we think like men. We think like men when we start to have those unsavory influences in our lives, usually under the phrase or under the title jealousy. Jealousy is when somebody has something better than me. Jealousy is when somebody else gets more rain than me. Jealousy is when somebody gets an estate windfall and I don't have any relatives left even to die to leave me anything. Jealousy is when somebody else gets honors and I don't. And even within this community, a small parish community, there's also that tendency to kind of like not announce too much what might be good news for fear of that kind of jealousy that hurts the fabric of our community. Even to the point that perhaps sometimes we don't like other people being too successful. One of the related issues to this theme has to do with our country's constant fear of immigrants and the way in which we think that every one of them coming over here is a leech in some way. And so there's this fearful attitude towards them that they don't deserve this. And yet the church speaks out of that mercy of God that this theme is all about. And it speaks to us about rights that we have, and that people do have rights to prosperity, rights to a family, rights to being able to sustain your family where you live. But if you can't do it there, then we have the right to move. We have the right to immigrate. It's a fundamental right to us as human beings. None of us in this room have experienced that in our lives, where all of the stuff that we take for granted is simply wiped away, and it doesn't exist anymore. Our home doesn't exist, our money doesn't exist, our job, our kids are based, it's just gone. And all you have left is just yourself and maybe your family. In that situation, what's left is simply the right to find a better life. So we have a right, there's two rights then that have to be balanced all the time in this discussion. Always the right of the country to protect its borders, but also there's those rights of individuals to try to live a better life and get a better way of life. Without a doubt, I think everyone would say that our immigration system today is broken, and certainly our guest worker policies in our country could be improved hugely to make things work, because the bottom line is that there are people who will do the work that we won't do anymore. We have a fear that animates this. A fear that things like, I can't vote for the way I think I should vote because I'll be thrown out of office. Or a fear of the alien because of what they might bring. Jesus' message to us today, in this unfair kind of parable that it feels like to us, is that he is always on the side of the one who has less. He's always on the side of the latecomer. He's always on the side of the weak one. He wants us to treat them with the kind of love that God treats us with. But you know, He's on our side too. That's what's strange about it. Because in the end, He made an agreement with those first workers. I will pay you the usual daily wage. And that's what they got. He didn't gyp them one bit. So if you think of the usual daily wage in terms of eternal salvation, they all got what they most needed. He's on our side too, with the daily wage that we might earn, with a lifetime of burden and sorrow and prayer and sacrifice. Because if we put faith in action in our lives, we're going to be doing that. We're going to evaluate ourselves against Christ all the time. We're going to find ourselves sometimes doing a pretty good job, sometimes wanting. But we're going to be working through our salvation. That's all part of working it out. But if you lived a life where that didn't happen, the Lord still is waiting for us at the end for that final turn back to Him like the good thief on the cross. Even the Old Testament gives us images of this, which says that we're always supposed to treat the strangers and the homeless with special treatment. Always reminding Israel, don't you remember when you were slaves in Egypt? Jesus, whatever you do to the least, you do to me. Our sense of human justice and fairness is quite often tipped towards ourselves, because when it comes to these things, we think of ourselves first. We often think about when we're getting cheated or when we're losing out on something. We're usually protecting our own skin first. Years ago, when Lincoln went to Gettysburg to dedicate the Union Cemetery, he started off his speech with those words that are etched in stone, literally, at the monument. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth onto this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Well, without a doubt, we are not all created equal. But maybe we are. Because the stuff that makes us unequal are the circumstances of our lives. Some people are born into a solid family, well put together. They have the resources, basically, to feed their children, to take care of things, to raise them and to be successful. And then there are those who are born into very broken situations, whether that be across the ocean, in war-ravaged lands, or even within our own communities where we deal with drugs and alcohol. Those are the circumstances that make us different. But the circumstances that Jesus wants us to evaluate on are the circumstances He sees. In God's eyes, we are all equal. And as Christians, we are called to see our neighbors